Barber, who is a research fellow at the Longwood Institute of Archaeology. He has a background in archaeology. He has a number of research specialities, so prehistory of Middle Atlantic region, zoo archaeology, lithic and analysis, public archaeology, settlement modeling, archaeological methods, as well as public education and outreach. So what he's doing with us tonight. So he has degrees from College of William and Mary, Kent State University, and University of Virginia. He's worked in the State Archaeologist Department, Department of Historic Resources, and was involved in some with, so he's going to talk how much he was involved with this, with Totera Town, right where the Moyer Sports Complex is. So very pleased to have you joining us tonight and help me with booking him. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate the introduction. I'd like to say at the onset of this is that I was peripherally involved with the excavation. The principal investigator for the excavation was Tom Clacton. Unfortunately, he's just retired and could not be here. So I'm basically summarizing what Tom did at the site. The other caveat I need to mention at the onset is there is no final report. It was never funded. So this puts me at a slight advantage as to the final discussion of the site. But anyway, let's move on. I like to start at the beginning. If you came here to hear about dead lizards, you're out of luck. I'm an archaeologist. I don't do dead lizards. I don't do live lizards either. But the famous anthropologist Errol Flynn, and as well as Raquel Welch, whatever they might say, dead dinosaurs are the study units of paleontologists, not archaeologists. I remember once at a Christmas, I think it was a Christmas party, there was an article in the newspaper that morning about a discovery of some bipedal dinosaurs in South America and how they protected their eggs, etc. Anyway, that subject came up because people found it exciting. And I spouted off on what I knew about and just had read in the paper that morning, you know, that seasonality, nurturing, protection, migration. And I saw that people were huddling around me as if I knew what I was talking about, which I did not. So no dead dinosaurs, no dead lizards. Also, people ask me a lot about rocks. One thing that Garrett didn't mention is that I also worked 30 years as forest archaeologist for the Jefferson and George Washington Jefferson National Forest. And we were on the 9th floor of the POF building, downtown Roanoke, hard to get to, got to figure out where you'd gone. So in any case, one morning, this gentleman came up and managed to get there and showed me this rock. And it was a fine rock. It was a green rock. And, you know, the caveat is I do rocks, but only if they're used for the manufacture of tools by humankind. And so he gives me this rock and he says, you know, please identify this rock. Chances have it, the geologist that morning was gone. So I said, I'm sorry, I don't have that information. So anybody who's worked for the government, state, federal, local, you know the spiel. My God, I'm paying your salary. You work for me. How could you be so stupid? You should know these things. So I took the rock, put it under a binocular microscope. I said, yeah, I recognize this. It's very rare, or it's not that rare in Virginia. It's bosonium. Unfortunately for me, my boss was standing outside and he indicated, I don't know how he got the idea that I was not being a good nose and that I should never do that again. Next time he wasn't standing there. Also, we do not put value on artifacts. The only time we'll do that is in ARPA cases, our Archaeological Resource Protection Act cases, where they come to court. We have to, in order to bring those cases to court, they have to be above $500. So we have to put value on artifacts, and only in that occasion. And again, the POF building, 9th floor, come up, wants to know, shows me this giant spear, and it's pretty well made. And he said, what can you tell me about it? I said, I can't tell you anything. He said, I want to know what material it's made out of. And I said, well, where did you get it? And he said, well, I got it around Hillsville. I was thinking, yeah, at the flea market, right? And he says, yeah. So he wants me to tell him how much it's worth. So finally look at it in great detail, get under the binocular microscope. And this time I figure out what it really is. And I tell him it's worth absolutely nothing. It's not worth a nickel. He says, why? I said, well, flint knackers, modern day flint knackers, often use the porcelain for used toilets to make artifacts because they flake very nicely. So what you have is something you probably don't want to describe. So anyway, what do we do? What do archaeologists do? Well, we reconstruct history. We reconstruct Native American history. And we do it by looking at the material culture that's left behind. And hopefully we do this through science, we do it through building hypotheses, and hopefully we could come up with some suggestions that are scientifically valid, we hope, as to what was happening in the past. And the real question is what's down there, and what's in the ground, and how do we figure out what it means. If you're interested in the first people, the Native American history of Virginia, this is the book you want to get. It's called, strangely enough, it's called First People by Keith Egloff and Deborah Woodward. It's available through the University of Virginia Press. So moving on, Batson Fowle, Expedition 1671. They're the first ones to actually mention it in detail, Totera Town, and it's not much detail. They were commissioned by General Wood to go beyond the mountains and find the South Sea. At that point in time, the theory was you get west of the Blue Ridge, there's going to be some river, sea, or whatever that will connect you to the Pacific Ocean. And therefore you get China and India and the spice from Virginia. I have a feeling that wasn't true. They're guided by an Appomattox Indian. They left the Fort Henry at September 1st, 1671. They passed over the Occoneechee Trail, ended up at Peters Mountain, said, hey, this is great, we claimed this for the king, and then they came back to Fort Henry in October 1st. The description in the diary of Fallon or Fallows, either name works, mostly describes landmarks, rivers, mountains, how far they went 40 miles west by south to stay. And so there isn't a lot of detail. But what we have as far as Totera Town is, ascending the mountains, coming through. And then our course over it was southwest. After that, we came to a very steep descent. At the foot thereof stood the Totera Town, and a very rich swamp between a branch and the main river of Roanoke, circled about with mountains. And they described their activities within the village itself. They spent 2 days there. They were exceedingly entertained, which doesn't help me very much. Anyway, as you're well aware, this is a 1935 15-minute map, and we have Totera Town located here. At that point in time in 1935, it was pasturage. And the reason it was in pasturage and continued to be so into the 1990s was that it's below, I believe, the 50-year floodplain. And it's susceptible to flooding. And there were restrictions on building on it. The site itself, this is a facsimile from John White in 1585 on the coastal plain, which is now North Carolina. But this will give you an idea of what we think was here. It was a dispersed village. Tom, in discussions with Tom, he indicated that he thinks this is actually not the site of the village itself, but more of a ceremonial center, a commercial center, administrative center, and that the village is over here, across the river on Riverside Drive, east of Mill Creek, Mill Lane, behind the Orange Market. It's a small industrial park. And we worked there with the Department of Historic Resources in the 1980s, late 1980s and 1990s. The local chapter of the Archaeological Society began working there, indicated that it was a very significant site. We continued. The owner, in developing the small industrial park, would level out and then build up above the floodplain, and as he would bulldoze away the topsoil, features would appear in the subsoil.
What's a McCord?
Pardon?
Oh, McCord.
McCord is Colonel Howard A. McCord.
Oh, I made it.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, he figured out various and sundry ways to estimate the population of palisaded village sites that he defined in Western Virginia. It's one of several ways to develop information on these sites. All the various and sundry calculations seem to agree pretty well. On this site, let's go back. Here you can see the two palisades that were located during that foray into the past. This was funded by the Department of Historic Resources through their Threat Sites funds. And we found these two palisaded villages based on the post molds and post holes that were uncovered when they bulldozed the site. What they would do is they would come in being entrepreneurs. They would take off the topsoil and sell it, and then they bring in subsoil and from other sites and build it up above the floodplain. But these would show on the surface of the subsoil. We're talking about, as far as culture is concerned, it's a late woodland culture. It's either the dispersed settlement or palisaded communities in Southwest Virginia. It's based on horticulture, gardening, slash and burn. Come in, burn off the trees, land in the ashes, and hunting, mostly white-tailed deer, also turkey. And you'll find it maybe amusing that the third most popular animal that appears on sites is the eastern box turtle. I suspect it has something to do with ease of capture. Social organizations probably at the tribal level, although there are hints and suggestions that was in certain areas elevated to a chieftain level. Tribal level is egalitarian. Everybody's equal. People rise to positions of leadership when based on their achieved status, what they're good at. And a chieftain, on the other hand, the position of power is ascribed, it's hereditary. You rise up as the chief, and you're the guy. You get egalitarian tribal society. It's a bunch of usually elders making the decisions, and it's somewhat different as far as if you are a commoner or you're not at chieftain level. The living quarters are wigwams primarily, with a few longhouses. The area that we're talking about in Southwest Virginia and all up and down the Roanoke River are Siouan speakers in the James River area, and as well as we're not sure exactly how all this fits in, but we are in Monacan territory now. Siouan speakers we're always all interrelated in some way. As far as Batson Fallon and Totera Town, we're talking about the Tutelo, which is actually the name of the tribe. Totera Town is the name of the village, as well as Sapani and Occaneechi. These were the folks on the Roanoke River. Occaneechi are far to the east in North Carolina, Piedmont. Sapani probably came all the way up to the Roanoke River, the middle Roanoke, and the Totera or the Tutelo are in Western Virginia and possibly on the Dan River as well. The local dialects were all Siouan. And the speakers who we're talking about extend into the New River and beyond. Brings us to Totera Town. This is the place of excavation. As you see, it's not exactly a pristine archaeological resource at this point. I don't know if you've ever dodged a bulldozer or a large machine that removes the topsoil, but it's a game, and you hope not to lose. But in any case, the archaeology entered late in the game as far as the planning for the Moyer Center, the softball fields. And as you can see, there were a few local nuances that affected the archaeology. And here you can see the beginnings of the field being built. The archaeologists worked throughout the week dodging these machines. They worked on weekends. We got a lot of volunteers, local volunteers, which enhanced the excavation. The Department of Historic Resources again funded this through threatened sites. We moved the crew. We had a crew working on the Sawyer site, the Palisade Village sites. We moved that crew over to the Graham White site is what it's called, and did the excavations there, helped out with the excavations. Here you can see some of the excavations. Again, it was totally salvage. The pits look something like this. This is one that's been bisected. What we're seeing mostly on the Totera Town site are storage pits that are usually 2.5 to 3 feet in diameter, 1.5 or 2 feet deep. That once their use as storage is done, they're converted into trash pits. And so they're filled with broken bones, broken ceramics, and some other things as well, which I'll discuss. The problem with doing archaeology and salvage is, and I don't have any slides of the field notes, unfortunately, but it's meticulous in its excavation. You clear off the feature, you draw the feature, you photograph the feature, you bisect the feature, you divide it in half, you photograph the bisection line, you draw it, you take out the rest of the feature, you draw the feature in, and then you relate all the features to one another. So it's very time consuming. It's an adventure in science, really, and having to dodge bulldozers makes it even more of an adventure. One thing we discovered early on, which was a double-edged sword, we came out I think we were sanctioned on the first Saturday, and we came out and excavated a pit. And then it rained that night. We came back Sunday morning, and in the backfill from the pit were these things. These are small shell disc beads. They're the size, they're just slightly larger, usually slightly larger than pinheads. And so we're talking very small. We were sifting through 1/4-inch mesh screen, and they went right through. So did we want to lose any of the information, any of the data? No. So we went to this. This is, all these white things are bags filled with soil from the film. These are to be wet screened and water screened later. Water screening, you use window mesh in the bottom of the screen or a tub. And then you have an outlet for things that float like charcoal. And usually you think of the wet screening or the fine recovery technique to get small carbonized seeds, which they did, which we did, but also the artifacts, the small artifacts. And if you think that small is irrelevant in archaeology, that's completely wrong. And that's a big mistake that archaeologists will make for years. Thinking that, 1/4-inch mesh is fine. Not so. So things recovered, ceramic sherds, broken pots, a lot of pot sherds. One thing about Siouan speakers, by and large, we see a use of what's called Dan River ceramics. These are localized ceramics tempered with sand and crushed rock application. Exterior decoration is usually cord marked, net impressed. Pots look something like this. This is a pot from the site itself, a Dan River vessel. Finger pinched along the shoulder. Sometimes the rims are excurved slightly. Round bottom pots for storage and for cooking as well. This is a DeBride rendition from John White's 1585 drawing, but it sort of depicts what we're talking about here. Small arrow points. I know a lot of folks in this area, well, worldwide, collect arrowheads, or what are called arrowheads. Well, in essence, usually the arrow points are the small triangular points. The larger points are spear points. And it wasn't until maybe 400, 500 AD that the bow and arrow was invented. So Virginia, for example, has been occupied for 17,000 years. And through that time period, spears were used. Often with atlatls, throwing sticks to increase the leverage. But in essence, what you're finding in the field primarily, if they're stemmed, if they're corner or side notched, or if they're lancelet, they're arrow, or they're spear points. If they're triangular, usually they're arrow points. And one thing that happens through the late woodland time period to contact is the arrow points continually get smaller and smaller and smaller. And that makes them more efficient as they can penetrate deeper into the quarry. And here's an example again from the bride. You can see the size of the bow. The small shell disc beads, these were recovered when the flotation was done in fairly large numbers. Some are burned. And also these are manufactured from clams, as are these. And these are what are really called, these are wampum. These are the small beads manufactured from clam shells. And the higher valued ones are actually the ones that are purple in nature. And some of these were found on site as well. In addition, and this is what makes this site unique, is glass trade beads. Usually a white, sometimes followed in frequency by blue, but made of glass and obviously of European origin. They're called Venetian beads, Venetian seed beads, although they were not only made in Italy and Venice, but they were also manufactured in the Netherlands, England, France, a few other places. But in essence, these are very indicative of the contact period. And here you can see this, again, DeBride gentleman with beads. Due to the date, most likely the beads in this case are shell beads, but the facsimile was that these were replaced shell beads in many cases. And one thing's, well, we'll talk about this in a minute. Other things that were covered, pieces of copper, cut copper. Now, when John White was at Roanoke Island in 1585, he saw this. He saw the Native Americans wearing gorgets made of copper. And this was copper that was most likely traded through the Monacan, in many cases, to the Powhatan on the coastal plain, or the Algonquian speakers, the people in this state that want Powhatan. But in any case, the copper was used like this. And our buddy John Smith and his boys, when they came in 1607, they realized what was going on with these things. And they brought many, many copper kettles that the Indians could cut up and make into these things. So it was a learning process, a commercial learning process, but still a learning process. So it changed the commodities for the Native Americans. So how do we interpret Totera Town? Well, one thing we do is we look at other sites, and I think the key to understanding Totera Town is found elsewhere, or is not found elsewhere, is reinforced from elsewhere. And part of it was, this is a typical palisaded village we find in Southwest Virginia. 16 have been reported west of the Blue Ridge in Southwest Virginia. Typically, what you have is the circular fortified area of saplings, usually a quarter to a half a foot in diameter, set in the ground, as with the previous palisades you saw associated with the Moyer site. Then a ring of houses. Along with the houses, you have the storage pits, the trash pits, the hearths, and the human burials. And then in the center, occasionally you'll have a hearth, a central hearth, or you'll have a large post. And this plaza is very important because this is where social events occur. This is where the community comes together. This is where people learn things and do things. So it's very important and very highly variable, the site itself. And here you see the sites we're talking about. Well, let's see. I only included the Brown Johnson site because it shows the early palisade. And here we have the Brown Johnson site in Southwest Virginia. You can see the ring, the outer ring is the palisade line, the inner housing along the edges of it, and the open central palisade. Here we have the Trigg site. The Trigg site is in the city of Radford. You see there's some problems here with the site itself. The Trigg site was occupied, we think, 1620 to 1660. It's a typical palisaded village with one exception, as you can see. The central plaza is filled with features. And what these features are burials. And at the Trigg site, as well as the Totera Town site, European artifacts were recovered in large numbers. And so what we think we have here, we think we were looking at the Trigg site, we're thinking that it is a prime example of the beginnings and the end of the deerskin trade. And what we have here is a change in the concept of the palisaded village. White-tailed deer were plentiful in southwestern Virginia. They were sought after. Even when John Smith arrived at Jamestown, he indicated that the white-tailed deer were gone. They had been extirpated. They had been funded out. And so even if when they were there, they were smaller than the ones in Southwest Virginia. So in Southwest Virginia, the hides were better, and the deer were here in ever high populations. Looking at the Trigg site, looking at the mandibles, the comparative with other sites, earlier sites in the area, the mandibles indicate that the age of death of the white-tailed deer at the Trigg site were from 2.5 to 3.5 years, which is prime, as well as the sex of the white-tailed deer that were harvested, primarily the bucks, which are larger and the skin is worth more. This work was done by Heather Lapham, another great book that's called Hunting for Hides. It describes all this in great detail. My contribution, as small as it was analyzing the bone tools from the Trigg site. And at that site, we have a very large number of metatarsal beavers, as well as metacarpal beavers, white-tailed deer. These are the lower leg bone. it articulates the hoof. And as well as the ephemera from black bear were also used to make these defleshing tools. And this is how they were used to process the fat and extra material from the skins themselves. I analyzed the bone tools at that site, and these things were everywhere. And it said to me that we were talking deer skin trade. Many, many more than were needed for just consumption by the average population. Trig site, like the other palisaded buildings, probably had a population of about 150. And so the number of beamers just far overwhelmed the production of hides, and obviously pointed to the deer skin trade. And this was the importance of the deer skin for the Native Americans themselves, but also we see a problem that occurred, or a influence that occurred 3,727 miles from the trig site. And this was the lack of leather in England. They were looking for replacement for, they were making jackets, they were making hats, but primarily horse gear. Horsepower was the name of the hour in England during that time period. And so they were looking for leather harnesses, etc., for to meet this need. And what they looked for were deer skins from Virginia and South Carolina. And these things by 1700 went out in the hundreds of thousands of skins, particularly from the Virginia trade, but also from the Charleston trade. And here's a depiction of some of the commodities, the trading network that became important. And what it led to was an increase in wealth of the Native Americans. And we always hear the myth, the adage of what Manhattan Island was bought for $24 or something. But in truth, what we're talking about for Native Americans in this area, this was amazing things they've never seen before. I mean, this was something completely new and different. And it's, like, I don't know what, an alien comes down here and says, hey, and you say, I've never seen it before, that'd be great. And if I have one, I'm a wealthy person. It increases my status and increases my power. And I think that's what we're seeing at the trig site. And so that's important.
So the trig is all in Radford?
In Radford, yes. I don't know if you've been to Bissett Park. Mm-hmm. There's a gazebo. Mm-hmm. That's where the trig site was. Okay. And this was pre many of the laws that helped to save sites. At that point in time, quite candidly, no one paid particular attention to Native American burials. And so Howard McCord, again, state archaeologist who worked for the state library, managed to get this site salvaged, even though there were no laws that indicated that had happened. So I congratulate Howard. Howard and I argued nonstop throughout his entire career, but I have to give him credit for what credit's due. But in any case, what we're seeing on the trig site here is hards and small structures. And I think these were used as smudge pits for processing the hides. The small structures were fairly small, 8 to 10 feet diameter. Probably didn't work very well for housing. And then, of course, you get this large cemetery area where the plaza should be. And what I think we're looking at is what comes in with European goods. Diseases, exactly. And we don't think about this often, but it's been documented further to the south in the southeast United States and in South America that some of these diseases, particularly in the southeast United States with De Soto in the 16th century, and his pigs and his soldiers and his explorations. Some estimates indicate that 90% of the Native American population died. And so we're talking decimation of the population. And I think that's what we're seeing in Tree. I think that's why we're seeing they were just overwhelmed. By that time, the concept of the normal palisade had gone by the wayside. The Trigg site had probably become a center, a commercial center, a center of ceremonialism, and finally a center for burials, due to probably small. So we have this dissemination of this site in the late 17th century. And I think this is what we're seeing, and this is where Totera Town enters into it. I think what we're seeing is the Trigg site being the processing area, the material going from Trigg to Totera Town. From Totera Town, it's traded into the Occaneechi. The Occaneechi became lead traders, and they were dedicated to commercialism. There's a letter in 1670, spent a night in Occaneechi Town, which is where Clarksville is now. And he, as luck would have it, when he was there, 6 Cherokee traders came into the village, and they indicated that they were going to establish a deerskin trade with the Cherokee. And he said that, you know, they were in the center. He described it as the lights went out, but I'm not sure how that worked. But in any case, when they came back on, the 6 Cherokee were dead because they did not want any competition. And so, in any case, the Occaneechi were the
town that Occaneechi is close to?
uh,
What is the town?
Clarksville.
Clarksville.
Yes. And that was not long lived in 1676, I think. During Bacon's rebellion, he came in and wiped out, not totally wiped out, but decimated the Occaneechi. They moved further down south along the Eno River. Common tale, but true. But in any case, I think that the Totera Town was pivotal in the deerskin trade. I think that it was one of the most important sites that you're going to see in Virginia. The end of the era of the Occaneechi and Totera Town. Totera Town became, and Tom Black was, this is his hypothesis, that it became the commercial center, the ceremonial center, the administrative center, religious center of the community. The people themselves lived across the river at the Sawyer site within these palisaded villages. And so it was sort of a specialized site, and it given even more importance. Middle end to the deerskin trade. That's another thing that is of interest here, is that at the, I thought I had a slide of it somewhere. In any case, at Totera Town, and one of the features was recovered a trigger from a snap-ons rifle. Snap-onses were incorporated at Jamestown early on. They actually, in 1607, they were army surplus. They were taken from the Great Tower of London, and where can we dump these? They said, well, Virginia's a good place to dump these. And so they were sent to Virginia, found their way to the Native American population, regularly replaced by the flintlock. And so, but at Totera Town, we have one of these. Now, at the onset of the deerskin trade, the Occaneechi, as I described, were pretty nasty folk, and they wanted to protect it. And so what they did, they had been set up by the Susquehanna, let's say, energetic. But what they were trying to do is keep the good stuff. And this is one of the things that Howard McCord and I used to argue about. He said, well, you know, if Totera Town or Trigg were involved in the deerskin trade, how come they didn't have multiple rifles? How come they didn't have hatchets and knives and all the stuff that other people, the Occaneechi wouldn't let them have that. And so what we're seeing here, I think, with Totera Town is the later part of the deerskin trade, where some of these guns were coming And I think that points again to the importance of Totera Town in the trading network and its importance at the regional and statewide level. And my humble opinion, the ball field, the end of the preparation for the construction of the site, softball. And here's Totera Town today. So